Welcome to our deep dive into the world of nuclear energy versus renewables.
Hmm.
You've given us a really interesting mix of articles and reports,
Yeah.
and I'm excited to dig in and kind of help unpack all this information. It's a topic with so many layers to it,
Right.
from the technical aspects to the economic factors and even public perception. And it seems like there's always something new to learn.
It's true. This debate is far more nuanced than it might seem at first glance. And with the climate crisis becoming more urgent, understanding these nuances is more critical than ever.
Right. And speaking of the climate crisis, one thing that jumped out at me from these reports is the almost paradoxical position of nuclear power.
Yeah.
On the one hand, it's incredibly clean in terms of carbon emissions,
Right.
but on the other hand, it doesn't seem to get much love as a green solution.
That's a great observation. And you're right. The data shows that nuclear power is remarkably low carbon. Its life cycle emissions, and that includes everything from mining the uranium to actually running the power plant, are comparable to wind and solar. We're talking just a tiny fraction of the CO2 emissions produced by fossil fuels.
So if it's so good for the climate, why does it seem to have such a PR problem? I mean, when you think green energy, nuclear power plants aren't exactly the first thing that comes to mind.
It's hard to escape the legacy of events like Chernobyl and Fukushima. Those disasters, though statistically rare, had such a profound impact on public perception that it's been difficult for nuclear power to shake off that association with danger, even with the advancements in modern reactor technology.
Okay, I get that those events were major setbacks,
Hmm.
but from these articles, it seems like modern nuclear plants have incredibly high safety standards. So are we letting fear outweigh the potential benefits here? Or is there more to it than that?
Fear is certainly a factor, and it's not entirely unfounded. The worst-case scenarios for nuclear accidents, though unlikely, are on a completely different scale than anything you'd see with renewables.
Right.
Imagine a solar farm malfunctioning. It's just not going to have the same potential for widespread environmental devastation as a nuclear meltdown.
That's true. It's hard to argue with that. And then there's the issue of nuclear waste. I mean, it's not something you can just toss in the recycling bin. From what I've read, we're talking about highly radioactive material that needs to be stored safely for generations.
Absolutely. Nuclear waste is a significant challenge. The current solution involves long-term storage in deep geological repositories, which are designed to isolate the waste for thousands of years.
Thousands of years.
The technology exists, but actually getting these repositories built and operational is a huge political and social hurdle.
Yeah,
No country has fully figured this out yet.
that makes sense. It's a tough sell to convince people to live near a nuclear waste storage site, no matter how safe it is.
Right.
But on the flip side, renewables have their own end-of-life issues, right?
Yeah.
Like what happens to all those solar panels and wind turbine blades when they reach the end of their lifespan?
That's right. There are challenges there too. While recycling programs for these materials are improving, it's still a far cry from a closed-loop system. And the sheer volume of materials involved as we scale up renewable energy is something to consider.
So both sides have their pros and cons in terms of environmental impact. It's not as black and white as it's sometimes portrayed. But I'm curious, what about the economic side of things? Has that factored into nuclear's image problem at all?
Economics definitely play a big role. Renewables have made incredible strides in recent years, with the costs of solar and wind power plummeting due to technological advancements and economies of scale.
Interesting.
In many places, they are now the cheapest source of electricity, period.
That's fascinating. So
Yeah.
even if nuclear power is clean, it might not be able to compete financially with renewables in the long run.
Yeah.
And from what I'm seeing in these reports, nuclear plants are notoriously expensive and time-consuming to build.
You're absolutely right. Building a nuclear power plant is a massive undertaking, often requiring billions of dollars and a decade or more to complete. Compare that to a solar or wind farm, which can be built incrementally and start generating electricity much sooner. It makes a big difference to investors looking for quicker returns and less risk.
It seems like the financial side of things is a major advantage for renewables, at least for now.
It is.
But there's more to this story than just dollars and cents, isn't there? You have to consider public opinion and politics, too.
Right.
And it seems like nuclear power just can't shake its negative image despite the climate benefits.
Public perception is definitely a hurdle, and each nuclear accident, whether it's 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, or Fukushima, reinforces that fear in the public mind.
Right.
This translates into political resistance, making it extremely challenging to get approval for new nuclear power plants.
Meanwhile, renewables have really captured the public imagination as the clean energy solution, haven't they?
Yeah.
It's almost become a feel-good movement, like driving an electric car or buying organic produce.
Yes. And there's also the issue of nuclear proliferation, which adds another layer of complexity. The same technology used for peaceful nuclear power can also be used to create weapons.
Right.
That creates international security concerns that renewables simply don't have.
Okay, that definitely complicates things. So we've got this powerful tool to fight climate change, but it comes with all this baggage.
Yeah.
Safety concerns, waste disposal issues, high costs, and a public image problem that's hard to overcome.
Yeah.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is, and it's a dilemma that we're going to have to grapple with as we move towards a decarbonized future.
Okay, so we've established that nuclear power has some serious challenges to overcome. But before we write it off entirely, I'm really interested in digging deeper into some of the potential solutions and advancements in the field. From what I've seen, there's some really exciting developments happening. Maybe there's a way to harness the power of nuclear energy without all the downsides. What do you think?
I think that's a very important question, and exploring those potential solutions is crucial to understanding the full picture.
Great. Well, let's take a closer look at those advancements, including things like small modular reactors and thorium reactors.
Okay.
And maybe, just maybe, there's a brighter future for nuclear power than we might initially think.
Let's hope so. You know, it's interesting how the conversation around nuclear power often gets framed as an either situation.
Right.
Either we go all in on nuclear or we abandon it completely for renewables.
Yeah.
But what if it doesn't have to be so black and white?
I've been wondering about that myself.
Yeah.
These articles you sent mention things like hybrid energy systems and the idea of using nuclear and renewables together. Is that a realistic possibility?
It absolutely is, and it's something that more and more energy experts are advocating for. We need to think about how these different technologies can complement each other, leveraging their respective strengths to create a more resilient and sustainable energy grid.
Okay, I like where this is going. Can you give us a concrete example of how this might work in practice?
Sure. Let's imagine a region with a mix of solar farms, wind turbines, and a nuclear power plant. During the day, when the sun is shining, solar power might be the primary source of electricity. Then as the sun sets and demand starts to peak in the evening, the nuclear plant can ramp up its output to provide a stable baseload supply.
So the nuclear plant acts as a reliable backup when renewable sources aren't able to keep up with demand. That makes sense, especially considering what we talked about earlier, how renewables can be intermittent depending on weather conditions.
Exactly. And wind power can also play a role in this hybrid system, providing additional electricity when conditions are favorable. By combining these different sources, we can create a more diversified energy portfolio that's less vulnerable to fluctuations and disruptions.
But wouldn't we still need a way to store excess energy generated from renewables during times of low demand? What about batteries or other storage technologies?
You're absolutely right. Storage is a critical piece of the puzzle. Battery technology is advancing rapidly, becoming more efficient and cost-effective all the time. And there are other promising storage options as well, like pumped hydro storage, which uses excess electricity to pump water uphill to a reservoir, releasing it later to generate power when needed.
I read a little bit about pumped hydro.
Yeah.
It seems like a really clever way to store energy on a large scale, but are there any drawbacks to these storage solutions?
Well, pumped hydro requires specific geographical features like mountains and reservoirs, which limits where it can be deployed. Batteries, on the other hand, are more versatile, but still relatively expensive for large-scale storage.
It sounds like finding the right mix of generation and storage solutions is going to be key to creating a truly sustainable energy system. But let's not forget about the other big challenge for nuclear power: public perception and political will.
Right.
How do we move past those hurdles?
That's a critical question. Public education and open, honest communication are essential. We need to move beyond the fear-mongering and misinformation that have often dominated the conversation around nuclear energy.
I agree. It seems like there's a lot of outdated information and misconceptions out there.
Absolutely. People need access to accurate, unbiased information about the risks and benefits of nuclear power. They need to understand how modern reactors work, the safety measures in place, and the advancements being made in waste management.
That makes a lot of sense. But how do we get this information out to the public in a way that's engaging and understandable?
Well, initiatives like this deep dive are a great start. We need more platforms where experts can engage with the public, answer questions, and address concerns in a clear and accessible way.
Transparency is key, right?
Yeah.
If people feel like they're being kept in the dark, it only fuels suspicion and distrust.
Exactly. And involving communities in the decision-making process is crucial. Nuclear power plants should not be imposed on communities against their will. There needs to be open dialogue and collaboration to find solutions that work for everyone.
It seems like building trust is really at the heart of this issue. But trust takes time and effort, especially when dealing with something as complex and potentially risky as nuclear power.
You're absolutely right. Building trust is an ongoing process, and it requires transparency, accountability, and a willingness to listen and respond to concerns.
Okay, so let's say we manage to shift public perception and gain more political support for nuclear power.
Mm-hmm.
We still have to address the economic realities, right? Nuclear plants are expensive to build and operate,
Yeah.
especially compared to renewables.
Right.
How do we make nuclear power more financially competitive?
There are several strategies we can explore. One approach is to streamline the regulatory process for building new nuclear plants.
Okay.
Currently, the approval and licensing process can be incredibly lengthy and costly, adding years and billions of dollars to project timelines.
It sounds like cutting through red tape would make a big difference. But what about the cost of construction itself? Are there ways to make building nuclear plants more efficient?
Yes, there are. One promising avenue is the development of small modular reactors, or SMRs.
Oh, those were mentioned in a few of the articles you sent. I'm curious to hear more about them. How are SMRs different from traditional nuclear plants?
Well, as the name suggests, SMRs are much smaller than traditional reactors. They're designed to be manufactured in factories and transported to sites for assembly, which can significantly reduce construction time and costs.
So it's kind of like a modular housing approach for nuclear power. That's fascinating.
Exactly. And because they're smaller, SMRs can be more easily integrated into existing energy grids and deployed in a wider range of locations, including remote areas or communities with limited energy infrastructure.
It sounds like SMRs could offer a lot of flexibility and adaptability.
They do.
But what about safety? Are they as safe as traditional nuclear plants?
Safety is a top priority for SMR design. Many SMRs incorporate passive safety features, which means they rely on natural forces like gravity and convection for cooling rather than complex active systems.
Interesting.
This can make them inherently safer and less vulnerable to human error or equipment failure.
That's reassuring to hear. But what about the waste issue? Do SMRs produce the same kind of long-lived radioactive waste as traditional reactors?
The amount and type of waste generated by SMRs can vary depending on the specific design and fuel cycle. Some SMR designs are being developed to use alternative fuels like thorium, which produce less long-lived radioactive waste.
Thorium reactors. Those sounded intriguing when I was reading about them. What's the advantage of using thorium as a fuel source?
Thorium is more abundant than uranium, and it produces less long-lived radioactive waste. It also has inherent proliferation resistance, meaning it's much more difficult to use thorium-based materials for weapons production.
That's a big plus from a security standpoint. But are there any downsides to thorium reactors?
Well, thorium itself isn't fissile, so you still need a small amount of uranium or plutonium to initiate the reaction. And the technology for reprocessing thorium fuel is complex and not yet commercially deployed on a large scale.
So thorium reactors are still a bit further out on the horizon, but it sounds like they hold a lot of potential for a cleaner and safer nuclear future.
Absolutely. And there are other exciting advancements happening in the nuclear field, like the development of generation Lviv reactors, which are designed to be even more efficient, safe, and sustainable than existing reactors.
It's encouraging to hear that there's so much innovation happening. But I'm curious, where does all this research and development take place? Is it mostly happening in individual countries, or is there a lot of international collaboration in the nuclear field?
International collaboration is absolutely essential, especially when it comes to developing these next-generation technologies. One great example is the Generation Lviv International Forum, or GIF, which brings together 14 countries to collaborate on research and development of advanced nuclear reactor technologies.
So it's like a global brain trust for nuclear innovation.
Exactly. And GIF is playing a key role in advancing the development of SMRs, thorium reactors, and other cutting-edge nuclear technologies.
That's great to hear. It seems like there's a lot of global momentum building behind nuclear power.
There is, and I think this collaboration is essential for overcoming the technical, political, and economic challenges we've been discussing. After all, climate change is a global issue that requires global solutions.
You know, it's interesting to see how much emphasis is being placed on international cooperation in the nuclear field. But even with all this collaboration and technological advancement, we still haven't addressed the elephant in the room, nuclear waste.
Right.
What are some of the long-term solutions being explored to deal with this challenge?
That's a crucial question, and there are several promising avenues being explored beyond the deep geological repositories we talked about earlier.
Okay.
One of the most intriguing is the development of advanced recycling technologies.
Recycling nuclear waste. That sounds almost too good to be true. How does that work?
These advanced recycling technologies can reprocess spent nuclear fuel and extract valuable materials that can be used to produce new fuel.
Wow.
It's a way to close the loop and get more value out of the fuel while reducing the volume and radioactivity of the waste that needs to be stored long term.
So it's like turning nuclear trash into treasure. I love that idea.
I know, right?
But are these recycling technologies being used anywhere yet?
Some countries, like France and Japan, have been reprocessing spent nuclear fuel for decades.
Oh, wow.
However, reprocessing hasn't gained widespread adoption yet due to concerns about cost, complexity, and the potential for proliferation risks.
Proliferation risks. Can you explain what that means in this context?
Reprocessing can separate plutonium from spent nuclear fuel, and plutonium can be used to make nuclear weapons. So there's a need for stringent international safeguards and oversight to ensure that reprocessing is not being misused.
That makes sense. It sounds like a delicate balancing act between the benefits of reducing waste and the risks of potential proliferation.
Exactly. It's a trade-off that each country needs to weigh carefully, considering both domestic and international security concerns.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this conversation.
Yeah.
From the technical complexities of nuclear power and its role in a hybrid energy system to the challenges of public perception and the promise of advanced recycling technologies. It seems like there are a lot of moving pieces to consider.
There certainly are. And it's important to remember that the best approach to energy policy will vary depending on the specific needs and resources of each region. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Okay, I'm starting to feel like I have a much better grasp of the nuances of this debate.
Good.
But before we wrap things up, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on a specific aspect of this hybrid energy system we've been discussing.
Huh.
We talked about the importance of energy storage to smooth out the fluctuations from renewable sources.
Right.
But are batteries and pumped hydro really enough to cover the gaps, especially when dealing with long-term variations like seasonal changes?
That's a great question, and it's something that energy researchers are actively exploring. While batteries are great for short-term storage, addressing seasonal variations requires looking beyond conventional solutions.
So what other options are on the table for long-term energy storage?
One technology that's generating a lot of buzz is hydrogen.
Hydrogen. I've heard it mentioned as a potential fuel source,
Yeah.
but how does it fit into the energy storage picture?
Hydrogen can be produced from renewable energy sources like solar and wind power through a process called electrolysis.
Okay.
This essentially means using electricity to split water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen.
Right.
The hydrogen can then be stored and used later to generate electricity when needed, either in fuel cells or by burning it in power plants.
So you're essentially using renewable energy to create a storable and versatile fuel source. That sounds incredibly promising.
It does, doesn't it? And hydrogen has the potential to decarbonize not just the electricity sector, but also transportation, industry, and even buildings.
That's fascinating. So you could potentially power a car or even an airplane using hydrogen created from solar or wind energy.
Exactly. And because hydrogen only produces water vapor when burned, it's a truly clean fuel source.
This is opening up a whole new world of possibilities. But I imagine there are still challenges to overcome before hydrogen becomes a mainstream energy solution.
Of course. There are technical challenges related to producing, storing, and transporting hydrogen efficiently and safely. And there are economic hurdles as well, as the cost of green hydrogen production needs to come down to make it competitive with fossil fuel.
It sounds like a lot of work still needs to be done, but the potential benefits are enormous.
Absolutely. And with continued investment in research and development, hydrogen has the potential to play a transformative role in our transition to a clean energy future. Okay, so we've explored a lot of complex and interconnected topics in this deep dive. We've talked about the technical aspects of nuclear power and its role in a hybrid energy system, to the challenges of public perception and the promise of new technologies like SMRs, thorium reactors, and hydrogen.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey, and I feel like I've learned a lot.
Me too. It's been a pleasure diving into these complexities with you, and I hope it sparked some thought-provoking questions for our listener as well.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this discussion, I'd love to hear any final thoughts you might have on the future of this complex and ever-evolving energy landscape.
Well, one thing that stands out to me is the importance of staying flexible and adaptable.
Okay.
The energy landscape is constantly changing, and there's no single solution that will work for everyone in every situation.
That's a great point. It seems like embracing a diversity of solutions rather than clinging to a single path is going to be crucial for navigating the challenges ahead.
Absolutely. And that means being open to new technologies, embracing innovation, and working collaboratively to find solutions that meet the needs of both present and future generations.
Okay, that's a great note to end on. But before we sign off, I'd like to leave our listener with one final thought-provoking question to ponder.
Okay.
Something that will keep them thinking about the choices we face as we move towards a more sustainable future.
As we stand at this crossroads of energy choices, is it more prudent to embrace a known energy source like nuclear, despite its perceived risks, or to forge ahead solely with renewables, acknowledging their inherent limitations?
Wow, that really puts things into perspective. It's not just about the technology itself, but also about how we weigh the risks and benefits of each path we choose.
Precisely. And it's a decision that requires us to look beyond immediate needs and consider the long-term consequences for our planet and for generations to come. There's a lot at stake.
You've given us so much to consider today. I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of the complexities involved in this debate.
I'm glad to hear that. It's been a pleasure exploring these intricate issues with you.
And with you too, listener. We hope this deep dive has helped you navigate the often conflicting information surrounding nuclear energy and renewables.
It's important to remember that there's no one-size-fits-all answer when it comes to energy. The ideal mix will vary depending on a region's specific circumstances, resources, and priorities.
So what's the next step for our listener having gone through this deep dive?
I think the key takeaway is that staying informed and engaged is crucial. Continue to research, question, and participate in the conversations shaping energy policy in your community and beyond.
That's a great call to action. Your choices as a consumer, a voter, and an advocate can make a real difference.
Absolutely. And remember, the journey of discovery doesn't end here. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those tough questions.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the possibilities. Until next time, keep diving deep.